In the Dakota Badlands, the sun doesn't just shine on you, it tries to kill you. And for Cordelia Mae Thompson, a school teacher from back east, the sun was the least of her problems. She'd been running for 3 days, or maybe it was 4. Time had melted into a single agonizing smear of heat and fear. Her fancy linen dress was in tatters, her ankles were bleeding, and her throat felt like it was packed with sand. Every breath was fire. Every heartbeat was a drum, counting down the seconds until they found her. They, being the men hired by Buford Kane, a name that tasted like poison on her tongue. She stumbled, her ankle twisting with a sharp, sickening crack. A scream tore from her lips, but the wind stole it right away. She collapsed onto the baked earth, the gravel biting into her knees. This was it. This was the end. She couldn't get up. Her body had quit on her. Kane's men would be on her any minute. She could almost feel their eyes boring into her back. Her vision started to tunnel, the brilliant blue sky swirling into a black vortex. Her last thought wasn't a prayer for rescue. It was a prayer for a quick death. And that's when a shadow fell over her. Her eyes shot open. A man was kneeling beside her, a silhouette against the blinding sun. He was Lakota, his skin the color of the rich earth, his cheekbones high and proud. His hair was long and black, held back by a simple leather band. He was all lean muscle and quiet power, a man born of this harsh, unforgiving land. But Cordelia didn't see a man of the land. She saw a man, and a man was the source of all her terror. He held a water skin in his hands, the promise of life itself. He moved to lift her head, to bring the cool water to her cracked, bleeding lips, and every nerve in her body screamed in protest. The memory of Buford Kane's hands on her, his bruising grip, the feeling of being trapped, powerless. It came rushing back like a tidal wave. "No!" she croaked, the sound a dry rasp. A strength she didn't know she possessed surged through her. Her hand flew up, weakly pushing against his bare chest. "Please, please, don't touch me." The warrior froze. His dark eyes, which she now saw were surprisingly gentle, met hers. He held still for a long moment, his expression impossible to read. He could see the terror in her pale green eyes, a fear that was deeper and older than thirst or pain. He understood her words, probably learned from traders, but the desperation behind them was a universal language. Slowly, carefully, he pulled his hand back. He didn't argue. He didn't force the issue. He simply set the water skin down on the ground beside her, then gestured to it. A clear, silent invitation. Drink. Cordelia's eyes darted from the water to his face, then back again. Her mind was a battlefield. One side screamed, "Don't trust him! It's a trick!" The other side, the primal, dying part of her, screamed louder. "Water!" Thirst won. With a shaking hand, she reached for the skin. It felt impossibly heavy. She brought it to her lips, and the first trickle of cool water was a miracle. It was a blessing so profound it made her want to weep with relief. She drank greedily, not caring that most of it spilled down her chin and onto her ruined dress. She was so focused on the water, on the feeling of life returning to her, that she didn't hear it at first. A low growl rumbling from a nearby cluster of rocks. The warrior's head snapped up. His entire body went rigid, coiled like a spring. In a blur of motion, his hand went to the knife sheathed at his hip. His eyes scanned the rocks, sharp and focused. And that's when she saw it. A mountain lion. Its tawny body was crouched low to the ground, its long tail twitching back and forth. Its yellow eyes were fixed on her, on the weak, easy prey that had stumbled into its territory. There was no time to talk, no time for gentle persuasion. The sun was sinking, painting the sky in shades of orange and blood, and the predator was hungry. The warrior Wanatan looked from the lion back to her. He saw the new fear in her eyes, the raw terror of fangs and claws replacing the terror of a man. He had to move her, and he had to move her now. He spoke a single word in his own tongue, a sound that was both a command and a reassurance. And then, ignoring her terrified gasp of protest, he moved. In one single, fluid motion, he scooped her into his arms. Her scream was sharp and frantic. Primal terror exploded in her chest. She started to struggle, her fists beating weakly against his chest, her legs kicking. No, let me go. Don't touch me. Be still, he said, his English clipped, but clear. Danger. His arms were like bands of steel around her, inescapable. But it wasn't a brutal hold. It was firm, secure. He held her carefully, supporting her back and knees, cradling her body without crushing it against his. A small, rational part of her brain, buried deep beneath the panic, registered the difference. This wasn't the bruising, possessive grip of Buford Kane. This was the touch of a rescuer. But the panic was a wildfire, and it refused to be reasoned with. He carried her swiftly and silently toward a high, defensible ledge. Cordelia squeezed her eyes shut, lost in the overwhelming, terrifying sensation of being held, of being utterly powerless in the arms of a stranger. The touch that was saving her life felt like a violation all the same. She was trapped in a nightmare where salvation and terror were the exact same thing. The shelter was a shallow cave, a wound carved into the face of a sandstone cliff. It offered a small respite from the wind and the predators that now stalked the twilight. Wanatan laid her down on the cool sandy floor as gently as he could. The moment his arms left her, Cordelia scrambled backward like a crab, not stopping until her back hit the rough wall of the cave. She pulled her knees to her chest, wrapping her arms around them, trying to make herself as small as possible. She was building a fortress out of her own limbs. Her breathing came in ragged, panicked gasps. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. Wanatan watched her, his face a mask of stoicism. It betrayed nothing of what he was thinking. He saw the wildness in her eyes, the way she flinched when he took a single step toward the cave entrance, to block it with a few large stones. He was a hunter. He understood the fear of a cornered animal. And this woman, this strange woman with hair the color of sun-cured hay, was more wounded on the inside than she was on the outside. He spent the first hour in total silence, giving her space. He built a small, smokeless fire just inside the entrance, using dry brush he'd gathered. The tiny flames pushed back the encroaching darkness and offered a flicker of warmth against the desert's plunging nighttime temperature. He took a piece of dried jerky from a pouch at his waist and chewed it slowly, his gaze never straying too far from her huddled form. Slowly, very slowly, Cordelia's terror began to subside. It was replaced by the dull, throbbing ache of her injuries. Her twisted ankle had swollen to the size of a small melon, and the pain was a constant, searing presence. The cuts on her legs and arms stung, and the world still felt unsteady from dehydration and exhaustion. She watched him. He was a creature of silence and purpose. He moved with an economy of motion, a quiet confidence that was both intimidating and, strangely, a little bit calming. He wasn't like the brash, loud men she had known back east, or the cruel, swaggering men who worked for Kane. He was a part of this land, as silent and watchful as the hawk she'd seen circling high above that afternoon. Finally, he rose and came toward her. He carried a small leather bundle and the water skin. He stopped a respectful distance away, about 6 feet, and set the items down. He then knelt, meeting her gaze directly. "Your foot," he said, his voice a low rumble. "It is hurt." She nodded stiffly, not trusting her voice. "I must look," he continued. He gestured to the bundle. "I have medicine." The thought of his hands on her skin, on her ankle, sent a fresh wave of revulsion and panic through her. The memory of Kane's fingers digging into her flesh, leaving bruises that were still faintly visible on her upper arm, was too close, too raw. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "No, thank you. I'll be fine." Wanatan's gaze was patient, but firm. He pointed to her grotesquely swollen ankle. "No, not fine. If it is not cared for, you will not walk. The poison will spread." Poison. The word hung in the air between them. He meant infection, gangrene. She knew he was right. Out here in this wilderness, an injury like this could easily be a death sentence. She was caught in an impossible trap. Her crippling fear of his touch versus the certainty of a slow, agonizing death if she refused his help. The instinct to survive, buried deep beneath layers of trauma, began to fight its way to the surface. It clawed against the terror that held her captive. She looked from his steady dark eyes to her own throbbing ankle, and then back again. A single tear of frustration and despair slid down her dusty cheek. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. He took this as the permission it was. He moved forward slowly, deliberately, giving her time to change her mind, to protest again. When she didn't, he knelt before her. But he didn't reach for her immediately. Instead, he opened his medicine bundle, carefully laying out dried leaves, a small pot of a dark salve, and strips of clean-looking buckskin. He explained each action before he did it, his voice calm and even, as if he were gentling a frightened horse. "I will touch the cloth of your stocking first," he said. He reached out, and his fingers brushed against the torn linen of her stocking. She flinched violently, a choked sob escaping her lips. He immediately pulled his hand back. He waited, his face impassive, until her trembling subsided slightly. His patience was a thing of stone. "The stocking must come off. To see the wound," he explained. His tone betrayed no impatience, no frustration. Cordelia closed her eyes, biting her lips so hard she tasted blood. Just, just do it." His touch was surprisingly gentle. His fingers were clinical and impersonal as he carefully rolled down the stocking. His movements were deft and efficient. When her swollen, discolored flesh was exposed, he worked quickly, examining it without any unnecessary contact. He crushed the dried leaves in his hand, mixing them with a little water from the skin to form a poultice. "This will cool the fire," he said, showing her the green paste before applying it. The poultice was blessedly cold against her hot, tight skin. As he worked, she found herself focusing on the sensation, on the methodical nature of his actions. This was not an attack. This was not a violation. He was a healer tending to a wound, not a predator claiming a possession. His touch was not about power or dominance. It was about preservation. He smeared the dark salve around the edges of the poultice and then began to wrap her ankle with the soft buckskin strips. Each pass of his hands was precise and sure. To do it properly, he had to lift her foot, his hand cupping her heel. The contact was unavoidable, solid and warm. Cordelia's breath hitched, her muscles tensed, ready to recoil. But she did not pull away. She forced herself to breathe. She forced herself to look at his hands and see them for what they were, instruments of healing. She noticed the small, faded scars on his knuckles, the quiet strength in his fingers. They were the hands of a man who knew how to survive, how to fix what was broken. When he was finished, her ankle was securely wrapped. The terrible throbbing lessened to a manageable ache. He sat back on his heels, his work done. The space between them felt different now. A barrier had been crossed, though not entirely broken. He offered her more water and another piece of jerky. This time she accepted both, her hunger suddenly ravenous. They ate in silence, the only sounds the crackling of the small fire and the distant lonely cry of a night bird. The intimacy of the small cave, the shared meal, the act of care. It was a strange and unsettling truce. Later, as exhaustion finally claimed her, she drifted into a fitful, troubled sleep. And the nightmares came. She was back in Buford Kane's study. The air was thick with the smell of his cigar smoke and whiskey. His handsome, predatory face loomed over hers, his cold blue eyes glittering. His hand reached out, grabbing her, twisting her arm. His voice, a menacing snarl, echoed in her ears. "You have something of mine, Miss Thompson, and I mean to have it back." She cried out in her sleep, a muffled whimper of terror. She thrashed, her good leg kicking out, nearly upsetting the waterskin. Juanatan, who had been sitting watch by the fire, was at her side in an instant. He saw the sweat on her brow, the terror contorting her features. He knew the demons of the mine were often more dangerous than the predators of the night. His first instinct was to reach out, to place a calming hand on her shoulder to wake her from the nightmare's grip. But he stopped himself. He remembered her plea. "Please don't touch me." Instead he spoke. He didn't know her name, so he used the word his people use for a woman he did not know. "Winyan." "Woman." He said it softly at first, then a little louder. "Winyan, you are safe." His voice, low and steady, pierced the veil of her nightmare. Cordelia's eyes snapped open, wide and unfocused with lingering terror. She saw his shape in the flickering firelight, looming over her, and for one heart-stopping second, he was Buford Kane. She let out a small shriek. "You are safe," he repeated in English, staying perfectly still. "The dream is over." The words, the calm tone, and most importantly, the fact that he was not touching her, slowly pulled her back to reality. The suffocating study faded away, replaced by the cool stone of the cave. The smell of whiskey was gone, replaced by the scent of wood smoke. This was the Lakota warrior, the man who had set her ankle. He had not hurt her. He had helped her. She sagged back against the rock wall, her body trembling with the aftermath of the nightmare. A wave of shame washed over her. He had saved her life twice now, and her broken mind kept turning him into a monster. "I'm sorry," she whispered into the darkness, the words feeling pitifully inadequate. "I'm so sorry." Wanatan simply gave a slight nod. He returned to his spot by the fire, resuming his silent vigil. He understood. The weight of a hand meant to heal was still a burden she was not yet ready to bear. And he knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that the man she saw in her dreams was still out there. He was still hunting her, and their journey had only just begun. The next few days unfolded in a slow, quiet rhythm, dictated by the rising sun and Cordelia's healing ankle. Wanatan proved to be a patient and surprisingly gentle guardian. He would leave the cave at dawn, a silent shadow slipping out into the pale morning light, and return hours later with a rabbit or a brace of grouse, which he would cook over the fire. He showed her how to find water, not in a flowing stream, but by digging at the base of a certain type of cottonwood tree, where the ground held moisture deep beneath the surface. He pointed out the plants that were medicine and the ones that were poison, his knowledge of this harsh land seeming as natural as breathing. Cordelia, a botanist by training before she'd become a teacher, was fascinated. Her fear, which had been a constant, suffocating blanket, began to recede, replaced by a cautious curiosity. In the small satchel she'd managed to save during her flight, she had her sketchbook and a single charcoal pencil. She began to draw the plants he showed her, labeling them with the Lakota names he taught her. Pezihota for sage, Wagmu for gourd. It was a language all its own, a way for them to communicate across the vast chasm of their different worlds. The rule of no touching remained unspoken but absolute. It was a silent, sacred pact. He never brushed against her, not even by accident. When he handed her food or water, he would set it down on a flat rock for her to pick up. He moved around the small, confined space of the cave with a deliberate grace, always conscious of the invisible boundary between them. This quiet, profound respect did more to soothe her wounded spirit than any words of comfort could have. It gave her back a piece of the control she had lost that day in Kane's study. She was not his captive. She was his ward. One afternoon, as she was sketching a sprig of sage, she finally looked up at him as he sat mending a tear in his moccasin. "Why are you helping me?" she asked, the question that had been hovering in her mind for days. Wanatan didn't look up from his work. He expertly threaded a piece of sinew through the leather with a sharp bone awl. "I saw a person in need of help," he said simply, as if it were the most obvious reason in the world. "Most others would not have," she pressed gently. "A white woman." Now he did look up, his dark eyes meeting hers across the small fire. "My grandmother Tasha says a person's spirit has no color. The land does not ask the color of the hand that draws water from it. It gives to all who know how to ask." He returned to his work, his hands moving with practiced ease. "You were dying. To leave you would have been a bad death, a dishonor to my own spirit." His words settled in her heart, finding a place she thought had been turned to ash. He hadn't saved her because she was a woman, or a prize to be won, or some project to fix. He had saved her because his own code of honor demanded it. It was a concept so foreign to the world of Buford Kane, a world built on greed and acquisition, that it felt like a revelation. A fragile trust, like a tiny green sprout pushing its way through cracked, barren earth, began to grow. She started to talk more, telling him about the lush green trees and wildflowers of her home in Pennsylvania, a world so different from the stark, beautiful land. He listened, his silence attentive and deep. In turn, he told her stories of the stars, of how the Great Spirit, Wakantanka, scattered them across the night sky like glowing embers from a divine fire. But while this delicate peace was being woven in the hidden cave, the world outside was not still. Miles away in the dusty, fly-blown settlement of Redemption, Buford Kane slammed a half-empty bottle of whiskey onto a rough-hewn table. "You lost her!" he roared, his handsome face contorted with rage. "A single, unarmed woman in the middle of the Badlands, and you three useless excuses for trackers lost her." Three hard-faced men shifted uncomfortably. The one in charge, a man with a scarred face named Rourke, spoke up. "Buford, a storm kicked up, wiped the tracks clean. It's like she just vanished." "People don't vanish!" Kane paced the floor of the saloon's back room, his expensive boots kicking up dust. He stopped and leaned in close to Rourke, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "That woman has my ledger. My ledger. Everything is in it. The names, the claims, the payoffs to Deputy Harris. If that book gets to the territorial marshal in Yankton, I'm ruined. We're all ruined." Deputy Harris, a portly man with a perpetually sweating brow, shifted in his chair in the corner. "Now, Buford, let's not get hasty. She's probably buzzard food by now. No one survives out there alone." "She's not alone," Kane spat. He ran a hand through his slick dark hair. "Cordelia Thompson is a survivor. She's resourceful. She's got a spine of steel buried under all that Eastern refinement." He looked back at his men. "I want her found. I don't care if you have to burn down the whole damn territory to do it. And I want that ledger." He paused, a cruel smile touching his lips. "Bring her back alive. I'll deal with her myself." His men knew what that meant. Kane's dealings were always personal and always brutal. Rourke nodded. "We found something. Near the river, heading toward the Black Hills. Faint, but they were there. Two sets of tracks. One was shod with boots, small ones. The other, moccasins." Kane's eyes narrowed. "An Indian, looks like," Rourke confirmed. "A scout, maybe. Found her by chance." A slow, ugly thought began to form in Kane's mind. The idea of Cordelia with someone else, with a savage no less, ignited a possessive fury in him. She was his to terrorize, his to control. "Then find the Indian," Kane said, his voice as cold as ice. "Find him, and you'll find her. Pay any of the local tribes for information. Offer whiskey, guns, whatever it takes. I want them found." He let the threat hang in the air, unfinished but perfectly understood. The hunt had begun again, with renewed vigor and a sharper, more dangerous edge. Back in the canyon, unaware of the net closing around them, Cordelia took her first tentative steps on her healed ankle. It was still tender, but the swelling was gone. She could put weight on it. Wanatan watched her, a flicker of something, pride perhaps, or relief in his eyes. The space between them had shrunk. Not physically, the invisible boundary was still there, but emotionally. They had built a small, quiet world in their sanctuary, but the world outside was coming for them. The moon was a sliver of bone in the ink-black sky. Wanatan grew restless. For 2 days he'd been seeing signs Cordelia couldn't. A game trail that was too quiet, a bird call that was just slightly off-key, a broken twig that hadn't been broken by an animal. He knew with the certainty of a man who reads the land like a book that they were being tracked. The fragile peace of their canyon sanctuary was about to be shattered. "We must move," he announced one evening, his voice grim. He was already packing their few belongings into a rawhide bag. "They are close." "They?" Cordelia asked, her heart beginning to pound a frantic rhythm against her ribs. But she already knew who he meant. "The men who hunt you," Wanatan confirmed, his eyes scanning the rim of the canyon high above them. "They ride with heavy feet and loud voices. They do not know this land, but they are many. It makes them careless, and it makes them dangerous." Fear, a cold and familiar companion, settled back into Cordelia's stomach. She thought she had outrun it, but it had found her again. She nodded, her face pale in the flickering firelight. "Where will we go?" "To my people," he said. "They make their winter camp in the shadow of the Pahasapa, the Black Hills. There you will be safe. It is a hard journey. We must leave now." The journey was a brutal ordeal. Wanatan pushed them hard, moving mostly at night, using the darkness and his intimate knowledge of the terrain as their allies. He led them through narrow, winding canyons that felt like the Earth's ribcage, over treacherous slopes of loose rock that slid and shifted underfoot, and across shallow, fast-flowing rivers that numbed their feet with icy cold. Cordelia's ankle ached with a dull, insistent throb, but she didn't complain. She saw the urgency in Wanatan's every move, the way his head was constantly turning, his ears straining for sounds she couldn't hear. He was a tightly wound spring of vigilance. On the third night of their journey, it happened. They were scaling a steep rock face, using a narrow, barely there ledge as a path. It was a terrifying climb, with nothing but black, empty air on one side. Wanatan was ahead, his body moving with the fluid grace of a cat. Cordelia followed, her fingers clinging to the rough, cold rock, her gaze fixed on her feet, trying not to look down. Suddenly, the loose shale beneath her boot gave way. With a small cry of alarm, she lost her footing. Her fingers scrabbled for a handhold, scraping raw against the rock. But there was nothing to grab. She was falling. In a flash, Wanatan spun around. There was no time to think, no time for words or warnings. He lunged, his hand shot out, grabbing her forearm in a vice-like grip, just as her full weight went over the edge. She dangled precariously over a 30-foot drop. The only thing keeping her from being dashed on the rocks below was the strength of his arm. The contact was a lightning strike. His hand, warm and strong, wrapped around her forearm. Her entire body went rigid, not from the fear of falling, but from the sudden, shocking, and utterly overwhelming touch. It was everything she dreaded, unexpected, inescapable. Buford Kane's leering face flashed in her mind's eye. His cruel grip, his mocking smile, the feeling of being pinned, of her will being erased. No! The word was torn from her, a guttural sound of pure panic. She began to struggle, a mad, instinctual reaction to the touch, forgetting for a terrifying moment where she was. Her writhing and twisting nearly broke his grip. "Be still!" Wanatan grunted, the muscles in his arms straining, burning. He had her, but her panic was making it impossible to pull her up. And that's when they heard it, the clatter of dislodged stones, rattling down into the canyon below. A voice drifted up from the darkness. "Did you hear that?" It was Rourke's voice. "Sounded like it came from up there." Another voice answered. They hadn't been seen, but they had been heard. Wanatan looked down at Cordelia. Her eyes were squeezed shut, her face a mask of terror. She was lost in her own private hell, reliving a nightmare while a very real one unfolded around them. He had to get through to her, and fast. "Cordelia!" he hissed, using her name for the first time. The sound of it, sharp and urgent, seemed to cut through her panic. Her eyes fluttered open. They were wide with fear, but now she was looking at him. "Cordelia, listen to me," he said, his voice a low, urgent anchor in her sea of terror. "They are below us. If you make a sound, they will find us. I have you. I will not let you fall. But you must be still. Do you understand?" She looked into his eyes, dark and intense in the faint moonlight. She saw not a predator, but a protector. She saw the strain in his face, the corded muscle standing out in his neck. He was using every ounce of his strength to save her. This touch, this was not a violation. It was a lifeline. Slowly, deliberately, she stopped struggling. She went limp in his grasp, a terrifying act of complete and total trust. "Good," he breathed. With a powerful heave, he began to pull her up. It was a slow, agonizing process. Her body scraped against the rough rock face, but she bit her lip to keep from crying out. Finally, with one last grunt of effort, he hauled her over the ledge and onto solid ground. They lay there for a long moment, panting, their limbs trembling. His hand was still on her arm. She could feel the heat of it through the thin fabric of her sleeve, the pulse beating in his wrist. It was a grounding sensation, real, solid. Below, the men's voices grew fainter as they moved on down the canyon, convinced the sound had just been a falling rock. They were safe. For now. Wanatan released her arm. The sudden absence of his touch was as jarring as its presence had been just moments before. Cordelia sat up, wrapping her arms around herself. She was shaking uncontrollably, the aftermath of adrenaline and terror washing over her in waves. She looked at him in the dim light. You saved me. He simply nodded, his gaze already scanning the darkness, searching for new threats. I, I'm sorry, she stammered, the words catching in her throat. When you grabbed me, I forgot where I was. I just reacted. He turned to look at her, and his expression softened slightly in the dim light. The body remembers, he said, his voice quiet, what the mind wishes to forget. It was the most profound thing anyone had ever said to her about her trauma. He didn't question it. He didn't judge it. He simply understood it. And in that moment of shared peril and raw vulnerability, the invisible wall between them crumbled into dust. He had been forced to touch her, and she had been forced to accept it. And in that forced contact, she had finally truly been able to distinguish between the touch of a monster and the touch of a man who was trying to save her life. Who was he? Wanatan asked quietly, his voice gentle. The man who put that fear in you. Tears welled in her eyes, hot and sudden. She had never told anyone the whole truth, not a soul. But here on a dark, windswept ledge in the middle of the wilderness, with the man who had just saved her from certain death, she found the words. His name is Buford Kane, she whispered, the name itself of foul taste. He wanted something I had, a ledger, proof of his crimes. When I refused, he grabbed me. He said he would take what he wanted, one way or another. I was lucky to escape. She took a shuddering breath. His touch, it felt like being owned, like being erased. She didn't have to say more. Wanatan understood. The world was full of men like Buford Kane, men who took without asking, who saw others not as people, but as objects for their use. He reached out his hand, not to touch her, but holding it in the air between them for a moment. It was a silent question, a gentle offering. This time Cordelia did not flinch. She did not pull away. With a trembling breath, she gave a small nod. His hand came to rest on her shoulder. It was a simple, comforting gesture. The weight of it was not heavy, not possessive. It was warm, steady, and respectful. It was a touch that said, "You are not alone. I am here." And for the first time since she had fled that terrible room, Cordelia didn't feel the ghost of another man's grip. She felt only the solid, reassuring presence of the man who had just saved her in more ways than one. The Lakota winter camp was nestled in a valley, protected by the granite sentinels of the Black Hills. The air was crisp and clean, sharp with the scent of pine and wood smoke. Dozens of teepees, their painted hides glowing from the fires within, stood in a great circle. It was a testament to community, to resilience, to a way of life that felt 1,000 years removed from the dusty, greedy town of Redemption. As Wanatan led Cordelia into the camp, a hush fell over the people. Children stopped their games to stare, their dark eyes wide with curiosity. Women paused in their work, beating moccasins or scraping hides, their faces filled with suspicion. A white woman was an unwelcome omen, a harbinger of the encroaching world that threatened their very existence. Wanatan ignored the stares. He walked with his head held high, his stride proud and purposeful, leading her directly to the largest teepee in the center of the camp. An old woman sat before it, her face a beautiful, intricate map of wrinkles, her silver-streaked hair in two long braids. This was Tasha, Wanatan's grandmother, a revered elder and medicine woman. I have returned, grandmother, Wanatan said in his language. Tasha's eyes, as sharp and bright as a hawk's, shifted from her grandson to the pale, exhausted woman standing beside him. She looked at Cordelia not with hostility, but with a deep, penetrating gaze that seemed to see past the torn dress and the fear, right into the heart of her. You bring a storm bird with you, my son, Tasha said, her voice like the rustle of dry autumn leaves. Her spirit is wounded. She was dying in the Badlands, Wanatan explained. Men hunt her. Bad men. Tasha nodded slowly. She beckoned Cordelia forward with a gesture of her hand. Trembling slightly, Cordelia stepped closer. The old woman's presence was formidable, radiating a quiet authority that was both intimidating and strangely calming. Tasha reached out, and instead of touching her skin, she simply waved a hand near Cordelia's face, as if feeling the air around her, sensing her spirit. The wound is deep, Tasha murmured, more to herself than to anyone else. It is a memory that has taken root like a poison weed. She looked at Wanatan. Bring her inside. She will have shelter and food. The rest is the work of spirits, not warriors. The inside of Tasha's teepee was warm and spacious. Buffalo robes covered the ground, and the air was thick with the comforting smell of sage and cedar. For the next several days, Cordelia was left mostly to herself. She was given food, water, and a safe place to sleep. The people of the camp kept their distance, their suspicion a palpable barrier she could feel whenever she stepped outside. Only Wanatan and Tasha spoke to her. Wanatan was often gone, joining the hunting parties that left at dawn or standing watch on the high ridges overlooking the camp. But when he was there, he would check on her, his presence a silent, steady reassurance. The forced intimacy of the wilderness had been replaced by a respectful distance, but the bond forged on that moonlit ledge remained, unspoken but strong. It was Tasha who began the true healing, and she never laid a hand on Cordelia. Instead, she worked on her spirit. She would burn sweetgrass and sage, wafting the fragrant smoke over Cordelia with an eagle feather. She explained that the smoke was to cleanse the bad memories, to purify the space around her heart. A touch is not just from a hand, Tasha said one afternoon, her voice a soft chant. She sat across the fire from Cordelia, grinding herbs in a stone bowl. A harsh word can touch the spirit and leave a bruise. A cruel look can touch the heart and make it cold. The man who hurt you, he touched you with his greed, with his contempt. That is the poison you carry. Her words resonated with a truth Cordelia had never been able to articulate. The physical act had been terrifying, yes, but it was the intention behind it, the complete and utter disregard for her as a person that had truly broken her. Tasha began to teach her things, not with grand lessons, but with small, quiet actions. She showed Cordelia how to beat a moccasin, the repetitive, intricate work calming her frayed nerves, giving her hands a purpose beyond trembling. She taught her the songs the women sang as they worked, simple, beautiful songs of the earth, the sky, and the changing seasons. It was a different kind of touch, the touch of shared work, of community, of tradition passed from one hand to another through a needle and thread. One evening, a young child, no more than 4 years old, wandered into the teepee. He had been chasing a puppy and stumbled, falling right beside Cordelia. He looked up at her, his big dark eyes wide with surprise, and then his face crumpled, and he began to cry. Without thinking, without a single shred of fear or hesitation, Cordelia reached out and put her hand on his small back, patting him gently. "Shh, it's all right," she murmured. "You're all right." The child's crying immediately subsided into small hiccups. He leaned against her for a moment, seeking comfort from this strange woman with the pale hair. In that instant, it felt as if the entire camp held its breath. Cordelia's own heart stopped. She was touching someone, willingly, and there was no fear. There was no panic. There was only a simple, pure human connection. A small boy needed comfort, and she had given it. The boy's mother rushed in, her face a mixture of apology and alarm. But when she saw the scene, the white woman gently comforting her son, and Tasha watching from across the fire with a small, knowing smile, her expression softened. She scooped up her child, gave Cordelia a shy, grateful nod, and left. It was a turning point. A stone dropped into a still pond, its ripples spreading outward. After that, the suspicion in the camp began to melt away like snow in the spring sun. The other women would offer small smiles. They began to include her in their work, showing her how to prepare hides or grind corn into flour. She was still an outsider, but she was no longer an object of fear or distrust. She was becoming a part of the rhythm of the camp. Her own healing mirrored the camp's acceptance. She began to sleep through the night without nightmares. The phantom sensation of Buford Kane's grip began to fade, becoming a distant, powerless echo. She found herself laughing at the antics of the children, feeling a sense of peace she hadn't known was possible. One night, Wanatan returned from a long hunt. He came into the teepee and saw her sitting with Tasha, their hands busy with beadwork, a comfortable, easy silence between them. He looked at Cordelia, at the newfound calm in her eyes and the gentle set of her mouth. And he saw a different woman from the terrified, haunted creature he had found in the Badlands. He sat down and handed her a small, intricately carved bird, fashioned from a piece of cottonwood root. "For you," he said. She took it from his hand. Her fingers brushed against his as she accepted the gift. It was a brief, accidental contact. A few weeks ago, it would have sent her reeling, her mind spiraling into panic. Now she barely registered it. Her focus was on the small bird in her palm, on the care and skill that had gone into its creation. It was a gift, an offering, another kind of touch, one of generosity and friendship. She looked up at him, her smile genuine and bright. "Thank you, Wanatan. It's beautiful." He simply nodded, but a small smile touched his own lips. In the warm, smoky light of the teepee, surrounded by the quiet strength of his people, Cordelia May Thompson felt something she had thought was lost to her forever, a sense of belonging, a sense of home. But the serpent they had outrun was cunning, and his venom was spreading, carried on the whispers of paid informants. And he was getting closer every day. The peace was shattered by the thunder of hooves. A scout galloped into camp, his horse lathered in sweat, his face grim. He brought terrifying news. A large group of armed white men, led by a man named Kane, were just a day's ride away. They were heading straight for the valley. An informant from a rival band, tempted by whiskey and guns, had sold them the camp's location. The serpent had found their garden. A grim resolve settled over the people. They would not run. This was their home, their sacred land. As the warriors, Wanatan among them, began preparing defenses, checking their bows and rifles, Cordelia's blood ran cold. This was her fault. This danger was her shadow, and now it had fallen upon these innocent people. She found Wanatan as he was checking his arrows, his movements sharp and efficient. "This is my fault," she said, her voice choked with guilt. "You should give me to him. He will leave you alone if I go." Wanatan's eyes blazed. He stepped forward and placed his hands firmly on her shoulders. She didn't flinch. His grip was strong, anchoring. "Do you think so little of us?" he asked, his voice a low, fierce rumble. "That we would hand a guest to a wolf? You are under our protection. Your fight is now our fight." His touch, born not of possession but of honor, sent a jolt of strength through her. She would not be a victim to be bartered. She would stand with them. Buford Kane was arrogant, but he was also cunning. He knew a direct, frontal assault on a prepared Lakota camp would be costly. So his plan was one of chaos and deception. As darkness fell, he sent his right-hand man, Rourke, with a group of men to the far end of the valley with torches. Their job was to set the dry winter grass ablaze. The massive fire would serve as a terrifying diversion, drawing the warriors away from the main camp. In the ensuing panic, Kane himself would slip into the lightly guarded camp, find Cordelia, retrieve his ledger, and indulge in the satisfaction of seeing her terror one last time. The plan worked perfectly. As a hellish orange glow filled the sky and thick smoke began to billow through the valley, cries of alarm rose from the camp. Wanatan, along with most of the warriors, raced toward the flames to protect the women and children who had been sheltered in the teepees on that side of the camp. The main camp fell into disarray, and through the swirling smoke and confusion, Buford Kane strode like a demon from a nightmare. He found Cordelia near Tasha's teepee, where she was helping guide frightened children toward the safety of the riverbank. When she saw him, she froze. He was just as she remembered him, handsome, cruel, and radiating a possessive menace that made her skin crawl. "Well, well," Kane sneered, drawing his pistol. "It seems you've gone native, Miss Thompson. I've come for my property." All her old terror, the suffocating, paralyzing fear came flooding back. Her breath caught in her chest. But as he stepped closer, something inside her snapped. She saw Wanatan's face in her mind, heard his fierce words. "Your fight is now our fight." She was not the same woman Kane had cornered in that study. She was not alone. "Leave them alone, Buford," she said, her voice trembling but defiant. "This is between you and me." "Oh, it is," he said and lunged for her. She dodged, surprising him with her quickness. In her hand was a small leather pouch. It was something she and Tasha had prepared, just in case. She threw its contents, a handful of fine, irritating, powerfully crushed poison ivy, directly into his face. Kane screamed, a sound of pure rage and pain, dropping his pistol as he clawed at his suddenly blind, burning eyes. He fired the gun wildly in his agony, the shot tearing through the hide of the teepee beside her. The sound of the gunshot brought Wanatan running. He burst through the smoke to see Kane blinded and staggering, and Cordelia standing her ground, fierce and defiant. With a warrior's cry, Wanatan launched himself at Kane. The two men crashed to the ground in a vicious, desperate struggle. But as they fought, another figure appeared from the smoke. It was Rourke, his rifle raised and aimed. "Wanatan, look out!" Cordelia screamed. Wanatan twisted, trying to roll away. But it was too late. The rifle cracked, and a searing pain exploded in his side. He cried out, his strength failing. Kane, seeing his chance, shoved the wounded warrior off him and scrambled for his dropped pistol. He never reached it. Acting on pure, primal instinct, Cordelia grabbed a heavy iron skillet from beside a fire pit. With all the strength and fury in her body, she swung it like a club. The skillet connected with the side of Kane's head with a sickening, final thud. He crumpled to the ground unconscious. Rourke, seeing his employer fall and the other warriors now converging on their position, turned and vanished back into the smoke and chaos. Cordelia rushed to Wanatan's side. He was clutching his wound, blood seeping through his fingers. Without a single trace of her old fear, without a moment's hesitation, she dropped to her knees and pressed her hands firmly against his side, trying to staunch the bleeding. Her touch was no longer a source of terror, but an act of desperate, loving preservation. "You're going to be all right," she whispered, tears streaming down her face, mixing with the soot and the blood on her hands. "I'm here. I've got you." He looked up at her, his eyes clouded with pain, but he managed to lift a hand, his touch surprisingly steady, and gently brush a stray piece of hair from her face. In that moment, surrounded by chaos and smoke, her hands covered in his blood, Cordelia knew that the last of her ghosts had finally been burned away, cauterized by a touch that was meant only to heal. The aftermath of the raid was grim. Buford Kane and his captured men were bound and turned over to the territorial marshal, who arrived 2 days later. The ledger, which Cordelia had kept hidden, sealed Kane's fate. The serpent had been defanged, but the victory was costly. 2 of the tribe's warriors had fallen in the fighting, and Wanatan lay in Tasha's teepee, consumed by a raging fever from his wound. Cordelia never left his side. The rule of no touch, once an unbreachable wall between them, was now a distant, almost unbelievable memory. Now her hands were constantly on him. She wiped his fevered brow with cool cloths. She changed the poultices of healing herbs Tasha prepared. She held his hand through the long nights as he thrashed in fever dreams. In caring for him, in fighting for his life, she found the final piece of her own healing. She was no longer just a survivor. She was a caretaker, giving back the life that he had given to her. On the 5th day, the fever broke. Wanatan awoke, weak but clear-eyed, to find Cordelia asleep in a chair beside him, her head resting on the edge of his cot, her hand resting on his forearm. As he slowly regained his strength, the camp rebuilt and mourned. And Cordelia found that she was no longer an outsider. The suspicion was gone, replaced by a deep, quiet respect. She was no longer the storm bird, the white woman who brought trouble. She was the woman who had stood her ground, who had helped save their warrior. Her place in the community had been cemented by her bravery and her devotion. When Wanatan was strong enough to walk, they went to a quiet place on the hillside overlooking the valley. The slopes were ablaze with the gold of autumn aspens. "The marshal sent word," she said softly. "Kane and his men are going to prison for a very long time. They will send an escort to take me back to Yankton whenever I am ready." "You will return to your world," Wanatan stated. It wasn't a question. His gaze was fixed on the far horizon. Cordelia looked down at her own hands. They were no longer the soft, pale hands of a schoolteacher. They were calloused and capable. "I don't know what my world is anymore," she confessed. "The world I came from created men like Buford Kane. It's a world of fences and deeds and laws that cage the spirit. I don't think I fit there any longer." She turned to him, her heart in her eyes. "You and your people, You showed me what it feels like to be protected, not possessed, to be healed, not broken. He turned to face her, his dark eyes searching hers. He reached up and gently, tenderly, tucked a stray piece of her hair behind her ear. It was a simple, profound touch of affection. She leaned into it, a trusting, natural movement that spoke volumes. The last of her fear was gone, replaced by a quiet, unshakable certainty. My world is here, Wanatan said, his voice quiet but strong. It is a hard life, a life of struggle, but it is also a world of honor and of belonging. He let his hand fall, leaving the choice entirely to her. Cordelia looked out at the valley that had healed her soul, then thought of the sterile, judgmental society that awaited her back east. The choice was not between civilization and wilderness. It was between a gilded cage and a difficult, beautiful freedom. Slowly she reached out and took his hand, interlacing her fingers with his. His hand was strong, warm, and scarred. It felt like coming home. The scars will remain, she whispered, thinking of the new angry mark on his side and the invisible ones that would forever be a part of her soul. Scars tell a story, Wanatan replied, his hand tightening around hers, a silent promise. They remind us that we have survived. Together they stood on the hillside, their hands clasped, watching the sunset paint the sky. They were two people from two different worlds, bound by the scars that remained, knowing their story was only just beginning. This story teaches us that true courage isn't the absence of fear, but the choice to trust again, even after you've been broken. It shows that the deepest wounds aren't always visible, and the most powerful healing can come from a simple, honest touch. If this story of survival, honor, and the incredible power of human connection touched your heart, please take a moment to hit that like button and share it with someone who appreciates a story with real heart. And don't forget to subscribe and ring that notification bell so you won't miss our next journey into the past. Thank you for watching.